Congress responds to the debate over gender and religious freedom, how the amendments could shape national policy. Donald Trump clinches the Republican nomination, how previously uncommitted delegates put him over the top. Supreme Knight Carl Anderson testifies before Congress what the Knights of Columbus are doing to put the spotlight on Christian genocide. And celebrating the feast of Corpus Christi around the world on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 26, 2016. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Presidential candidate Donald Trump has clinched the Republican nomination. He reached 1,238 delegates of the 1,237 needed. It happened after a small number of unbound delegates said they would support him at the convention. He will accept the nomination in Cleveland in July.
The folks behind me got us right over the top from North Dakota, so North Dakota made a big statement, and I just really appreciate it. If I didn't win by massive majorities, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you today.
Another Trump rally ends in a clash with protesters. Police arrested 5 people outside the Anaheim Convention Center in California. Police were injured in riots at a Trump event in New Mexico yesterday. And Hillary Clinton hits Trump hard, saying he lacks foreign policy experience.
One of my favorite Trump comments of the last couple of weeks is he does have foreign policy experience dealing with Russia because he staged the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow one year. That was a particular favorite.
Clinton is less than 1 delegate shy of securing the Democratic nomination. Rival Bernie Sanders has promised to challenge her all the way to the convention. And in a moment, we will take a closer look at presidential polls and the impact they're having on this year's election. President Obama also says Donald Trump has rattled world leaders with his rhetoric. The president took the swipe at Trump during a press conference in Japan where he's attending the G7 summit.
They are paying very close attention to this election. I think it's fair to say that they are surprised by the Republican nominee. They are not sure how seriously to take some of his pronouncements.
The president heads to Hiroshima tomorrow. He says he will underscore the very real risks of nuclear weapons and the urgency that we all should have. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The battle between transgender bathrooms and religious freedom spills onto the House floor and leads to the defeat of the energy appropriations bill. Jason Calvi is here to explain from Capitol Hill. Jason.
Lauren, the House passed dueling amendments last night, one backed by supporters of so-called gay rights, the other by those who oppose President Obama's transgender bathroom guidance. Both were added on to the final energy bill, and that was enough to upset both Democrats and Republicans. An overwhelming 305 members of Congress shot down the final energy bill today.
This was the scene last week when New York Democratic Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney introduced a gay rights amendment to a spending bill.
A second chance to do the right thing and to stand for equality.
And this is the scene last night in the House chamber where he proposed it again, and it passed.
The amendment is adopted.
It would put into law President Obama's order barring federal contractors from discriminating against gay and transgender people. Republican Joe Pitts voted against the proposal, but was successful in adding words to protect freedom of religion and the power of the legislative branch.
It is not the right of the president to make law with an executive order. Congress writes the laws.
Conservatives were able to pass and attach other amendments last night to the energy bill.
The yeas are 233, the nays are 186.
Alabama Republican Bradley Burns' amendment would block the president's gay rights order from applying to religious groups, schools, and charities.
My amendment would ensure that every person who wants to contract with the government would have the freedom of religious conscience to say, I'm only going to hire people that agree with the tenets of my religion. So a hospital, a religious-run hospital, a religious-run school.
The amendment is adopted.
Republican Congressman Robert Pittenger passed an amendment that would make sure federal dollars are not taken away from North Carolina if it enforces what's called the bathroom bill. The state law requires people to use restrooms matching the sex on their birth certificate, a state law the Obama administration is fighting.
States have authority, they have rights, they have powers. They shouldn't be under the edict or the mandate of the federal government to begin with.
But in the end, the amendments were too much for either side to take, and the bill was killed.
House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi says Republicans are taking the side of North Carolina and their bathroom bill. She calls that bill, quote, hateful. Speaker Paul Ryan today blasted Democrats for supporting the gay rights amendment yesterday, and then today voting against the amended spending bill. He calls that, Lauren, sabotage.
Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you. New reaction over a new transgender bathroom directive. As we reported yesterday, Texas led 11 states to sue the Department of Education and the Department of Justice. The directive, issued May 13th by the Obama administration, requires schools to allow students to use facilities based on their self-determined gender identity or lose federal funding.
The Obama administration is creating new law outside the bounds of the Constitution, making the kind of changes only Congress can make.
Texas's Attorney General Ken Paxton said the legal action aims to protect the Harold Independent School District, which voted Monday to challenge the new policy.
Harold ISD is now facing legal action or the loss of school funding, all for enacting a policy to protect their students.
The school superintendent said it's a matter of privacy.
We are suing to keep the federal government out of our children's locker rooms and restrooms.
Opponents of the order also raised fears about safety and say they're willing to take the case all the way to the top.
We're willing to fight this all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The U.S. makes progress in the fight on terror. The State Department is saying coalition forces have reduced ISIS's hold on Iraq and Syria, but challenges remain.
Terrorist groups continue to exploit instability, along with weak or non-existent governance, sectarian conflict, and porous borders in key regions of the world to extend their reach, terrorize civilians, and attract and mobilize new recruits.
ISIS continues to bomb symbolic targets and kill civilians. Now, he says the U.S. is working with 55 other countries to help track terrorists. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are challenging the Obama administration to do more to stop ISIS's genocide of Christians and other minorities in the Middle East. That call to action came today during a hearing spearheaded by Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey. Members of several religious and non-religious groups talked about ISIS's slaughter of tens of thousands of innocent people in the last 2 years. Carl Anderson, the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, says there's only so much private groups can do to help.
American policy should recognize the important differences in the situations of those fleeing violence and those targeted for genocide. And quite frankly, we should prioritize the latter.
Anderson went on to say the Christian population of Iraq has declined by more than 80%. In Syria, it's down by 70%. Earlier this year, Secretary of State John Kerry labeled ISIS atrocities as genocide. That move has sparked debate on Capitol Hill as to what steps the government can take to stop the persecution. And Senator Marco Rubio is pushing for a solution to the growing problem of heroin abuse. He wants to stop cartels from sneaking drugs across the border. Wyatt Goolsby is reporting from Capitol Hill. Wyatt.
Lauren, drugs coming into the United States from Mexico is just one part of the problem. Senator Rubio says the other issue is making sure Americans who become addicted are able to seek help. Both problems were highlighted this morning's Senate hearing. Senators are calling addiction to opioids and other painkillers a public health crisis. Narcotic experts and national drug enforcement leaders admitted more work needs to be done with Mexican officials to combat the drugs coming across the border. In addition, Orange County, Florida Mayor Teresa Jacobs told senators about the widespread heroin problem in her community. She says getting drugs is often easy and cheap, which is why her community and the nation need an education campaign.
I think that's what we have to do with heroin. We have to reach out to our young people. We have to get them before they become addicts, before they even think about it, and we have to change their mentality to what is cool and what isn't cool. And it's doable. We've done it before. We can do it again.
One of the problems Jacobs highlighted was how addicts are treated after they overdose. Typically, there's only two options. They either go to jail or they go straight to rehab. And what she says is we need to rethink that aspect. They need to encourage addicts to speak out about their problem in order to get the proper treatment. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsby on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Wyatt. Good news on this Memorial Day weekend. The head of the TSA says he's moving resources to the top 20 airports. That's to trim long lines at security checkpoints.
We're watching them very carefully, and we're watching it in real time right now. So I watch right now what's happening, as well as predictive over the next 24 hours. And we now have the ability to rapidly shift resources.
At a time when the number of agents is at its lowest, TSA expects a 15% jump in travelers. The agency plans to hire more workers and pay overtime to existing staff to make up for the shortfall. A recent op-ed in the New York Times calls on Americans to stop the polling insanity this presidential election. The political scientist says in this highly charged election, it's no surprise that the news media see every poll like an addict sees a new fix. That is especially true of polls that show large and unexpected changes. Those polls get intense coverage and analysis, adding to their presumed validity. We're joined by the author of that op-ed, Norman Ornstein, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you, Lauren.
Our nation is obsessed with polls, and you have said that the polls that make news are often wrong. How should voters interpret polls?
Well, the first thing is whenever you see a new poll that becomes the rage of the day, and news organizations, especially cable news networks, but also the organizations that do the polls, that hype them up, don't pay a lot of attention. Any given poll in any given day doesn't mean very much. You need to look at averages of polls, and that's for a couple of reasons. One main reason is polling is not very good these days. There really is a kind of crisis in the polling world. You know, we do most of these polls by telephone. They tend to get more landlines, many fewer cell phones at a time when Americans are not using landlines. The response rates, we all know when we get these calls from polling organizations and don't want to do it, are down around 9%. So they have to make all kinds of judgments, balances. It's art and not science, and a lot of it is very bad art. And we make a big deal out of little changes or even big changes in a day, which tend not to be very accurate.
You're also on the bandwagon of saying that Congress, our Congress right now, 114th, could get to a D grade by the time they're done. Why is that?
This has really been a bad Congress. And I'm not just talking about the embarrassment now that both the House and Senate have decided they can't even begin to do a budget. Something that they had said in the past, the Republicans in the majority, was the absolute bottom line basic responsibility for Congress. It doesn't look like they can do any of the individual spending bills for a fiscal year that begins on October 1st. But even more than that, when you look at areas of crisis, things like Zika, Puerto Rico, where we've had an urgency to act and where we know that the failure to act now means a much greater cost later on. Congress's inability to move, or when it does move, to underfund these issues. I'll throw in another one now, the TSA crisis, where people are missing airplanes and going through long lines, is just an embarrassment for the country.
We just had a report on that talking about it. They're having another hearing today on both of those things. And on Zika, the White House has asked for a lot of money at the recommendation of the CDC, and that is being ignored. So it seems to me, Mr. Ornstein, that you're on the side of the White House on several of these issues. We want to thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you again soon. Coming up, remembering a saint's right-hand man, the Cardinal who served as Pope John XXIII's personal secretary. And procession through Poland, how they're celebrating the feast of Corpus Christi. Jesus gives himself to us in the Eucharist, offering himself as spiritual food that sustains our life. That's a tweet from Pope Francis, who is celebrating the feast of Corpus Christi with a Eucharistic procession in Rome tonight. The U.S. celebrates this Sunday. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. 2 board members of the Vatican Bank resign over disagreements about the management and mission of the institution. Our Rome producer, Mary Shovlain, joins us from Rome. Mary, what happened? Is this a bad sign for the Vatican?
You know, I don't think so at all, Lauren. I think it might look like that from the outside, but basically 2 of the men resigned from this board, this council that oversees the Vatican's financial operations, and that's going to happen anywhere, isn't it? You've got a lot of independent businessmen with really rich experience and backgrounds that have come in to help out, and I think after a couple of years, they decided they didn't like the way things were being managed and maybe the mission of the Vatican Bank itself, and so they decided to leave. But a search is on for their replacements, and the Vatican's going to push right ahead with the reforms.
Well, what is the Vatican Bank for? Can I come to Rome and put my money in the Vatican Bank?
No. You have to either work for the Holy See, but even in that case, not all Vatican employees have a bank account here. You need to be an association tied to the Vatican, like a pontifical university or some monasteries or seminaries throughout the world that may be officially tied to the Vatican. A religious congregation can also have an account here, and institutes that are tied to the Catholic Church for charitable works.
So then why specifically is the bank in need of reform? Pope Francis has made reform one of his priorities.
Exactly. He is the Pope of reform for sure. And it's interesting to note that the Vatican Bank published its first public financial report only 3 years ago. This is an institution that's 2,000 years old. The word bank itself comes from Italy. So the fact that they only published their first financial report 3 years ago says they had to learn how to open their books. Financial transparency. There have been some financial scandals in the past, usually involving money laundering by the clients, not by the Vatican. So they're complying with international norms now. They're getting up to speed, and the reforms are taking place.
Mary Shovlain, our Rome producer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Italian Cardinal Loris Francesco Capovilla has died. Capovilla was Pope John XXIII's personal secretary and was by his side when the Pope convened the Second Vatican Council. In 2014, Pope Francis made him a cardinal, and Cardinal Capovilla was 100 years old. Thousands of Catholics marched through cities across Poland to celebrate the feast of Corpus Christi, known as the body and blood of Christ. In Warsaw, crowds of people took part in a Eucharistic procession. The faithful walked the streets to profess faith in real presence of Christ in the Holy Eucharist. Locals wore traditional Polish dresses, and first communicants scattered roses on the ground. It ended with Eucharistic adoration. Up next, Foreign Affairs. The head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is reaching out a hand to refugees. And National Spelling Bee, how a Catholic homeschooler earned the spot in the Final 50. A deadly accident in the Mediterranean Sea as a boat full of migrants capsized. An Italian patrol ship rescued many survivors, but at least 20 people died. The Italian Coast Guard says overall it's rescued more than 4,000 migrants from the Mediterranean today, which may be a new record. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The head of the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine says priests play a critical role in helping people living in the middle of the conflict there.
Of course, priest is not a simple social worker. By our pastoral care, we are bringing a witness to those who very often would feel themselves to be abandoned by everybody. And in such painful conditions, people would ask, does God cares about us? Are we forgotten by God?
The Archbishop says too many countries ignore suffering in the Ukraine, where national forces have been fighting Russia-backed rebels for 2 years. He believes the international community needs to come together to solve the conflict. As we reported earlier, President Barack Obama is in Japan for the G7 summit. But the author of a new book says Obama's foreign policy leadership has weakened America's credibility in the world. Joining us is Dr. Robert Lieber. He's a government professor at Georgetown University and the author of the new book, Retreat and Its Consequences. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Is retreat bad? When President Obama became president, he said, I will end the war in Iraq. And so we were retreating. And you're saying that retreating in many instances is not good for the country.
To end a war, it takes two. The enemy gets a vote. Unfortunately, the way in which we withdrew from Iraq at the end of 2011, instead of ending things, helped to create the conditions in which it flared up again. Terrible things happened, and we've been drawn back in. We have 5,000 troops in Iraq. They're not called combat troops, but in fact they are exposed to the risks of war again because our national interests and the stability of the Middle East are at risk.
And the president hasn't been able to wipe out ISIS. I mean, that is part of the issue that you're talking about here?
ISIS got its foothold, got its opportunity to flourish as a result of the nature of our withdrawal. We ought to have withdrawn and pulled back in a way that left sufficient U.S. presence to support the Iraqi military and to keep things stable. And the nature of the complete withdrawal was such that it opened up it created conditions for chaos after we left.
Sure. Where else in the world do you see us weakened?
Ukraine. You just had a piece on Ukraine. The attack on Crimea and Ukraine by Putin, an attack is exactly what it was, took place in part because Putin calculated that the United States would not prevent this from happening or not support the Ukrainians. We did not.
Right.
They were desperate at the start for defensive weapons, and we gave them 300,000 meals ready to eat instead of body armor and defensive weapons.
But the president has also done many different things, like opening relations with Cuba, the Iran nuclear deal. And those are things that are seen by many as positives. Would you see them that way? Is that a negative against the Obama doctrine?
They're a mixed bag. In the case of the Iran nuclear agreement, of course, we all want Iran not to have nuclear weapons. All that the Iran nuclear agreement does is kick the can down the road 10 to 15 years at best. At the end of it, even if Iran sticks to the agreement, which it has violated in important ways since its signing, they will emerge with a fully established modern nuclear capacity to enable them to go nuclear if they choose to do so. In Cuba, freedom is just not even a calculation.
All right. Dr. Robert Lieber, Retreat and Its Consequences. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
After 4 brutal hours, only 10 spellers remain in the annual Scripps National Spelling Bee. One competitor says some of the words were Catholic, like this one we quizzed her on.
Encyclical. ENCYCLICAL. Encyclical.
8th grader Larissa Tuttle made it into the top 45 finalists. She missed her word today, but the Indianapolis middle schooler credits her Catholic faith for getting her this far in the competition.
I'm constantly praying when I'm on stage. I have really grown in my devotion to Mary through this, just constantly praying to her and asking for her as my mother to help me. I'll sometimes talk to the saints or pray to the saints while I'm on stage, just because it kind of helps me relax, because I sometimes think of the saints as my friends, and I know they're up there praying for me.
What a wonderful girl. Larissa's favorite saints to pray to on stage include St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Jerome, and St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Lauren Ashburn. We will leave you tonight with video from the Americas exhibit at the Vatican Museums. It features indigenous artifacts collected by missionaries. The collection just reopened after a 2-year restoration. Good night, and God bless.